Hey guys, I really have no script for this episode, but what we'll talk about is how house prices never really went up. It seems like a really silly question, but I think this is really the crux of why people don't invest or buy property or land and then expect house prices to crash only to then miss out on future gains. Okay, there might be a lot of ums and ahs in this episode because I'm genuinely thinking as I talk through it. But I get asked this question a lot, PK, how can house prices continue to go up at such a fast rate when cost of living is through the roof, inflation? I mean, cumulative inflation, prices in Australia have gone up more than 30% since the start of COVID. We only hear about that 5 or 6, 7% inflation rate. But if you put all those 5 or 6 or 7% together over multiple years, some statistics, actually say that prices have gone up more than 20, 30%. So how can people still afford to buy property? How is this not a bubble? To answer this, and the other thing as well is wages haven't really grown. If you look at statistics since 1990, or I should be more specific, really since the year 2000, wages have barely kept up with purchasing power insofar as inflation. That's what I mean. So if wages have gone up, yeah, just a little bit more than CPI, a little bit down than CPI, the house prices have increased at a clip of 4x, 5x the rate of wage growth, then how is that sustainable? Like, how is that going to carry on? And if I'm a brand new person in Australia or first home buyer or upgrader or investor, these are the questions I'm kind of thinking to myself, and it makes property investing really not viable because even though people like me, it's easy for us to scoff or scorn at comments on Facebook groups that say property prices to crash because, wages haven't grown, because debt to GDP is through the roof, etc., etc. Actually, I think we need to meet those questions or challenges with patience and maturity and empathy. Because if I had not had or have right now a 10 plus property portfolio, I'd probably be asking those same questions. And probably I have confirmation bias now in those people because they have no skin in the game and they're seeing all these other people get wealthy and they're left out. They probably have some confirmation bias too to say it's all going to come crashing down, crumbling down. And so, to answer all these questions, we actually have to go all the way back to 1970, in the early 1970s, where, and I'm going to do a much more extravagant and data-based. I'm going to share with you dozens of charts in a future episode to really validate and edify everything that I'm sharing with you right now. But I just spontaneously wanted to talk about this. I don't know why. Yeah, I don't get out much. No, I do. I do. I'm just being self-deprecating. But yeah, it was just on my mind, so I thought let's talk about it.
Welcome to the Oz Property Investment Mastery Podcast. My name's PK and I help busy people build passive income by buying top 5% growth and cash flow property and build a portfolio using data without wasting months doing research, spending weekends at inspection or catching flights, or dropping $10,000 to $20,000 on buyer's agents every single time. So if you're confused, lack confidence, and just overwhelmed with all the information and marketing misinformation available online and don't know where to start, then this show is for you.
When the Australian dollar, the US dollar, so many currencies back in the early 70s were decoupled from the gold standard. For those of you who don't know, previously a dollar was only worth a dollar, let's say in the US, because it bought a certain amount of gold. It was pegged to the price of gold, so you couldn't have unlimited money in the world because there wasn't unlimited gold, or at least not drilled and not drilled, that it's not iron ore, it's not oil, but it wasn't explored, at least not available gold. Sure, there might be unlimited under the surface of the earth, I don't know. But at least what humans have available to them, it was not unlimited. So therefore, money supply can't and couldn't be unlimited. But what central banks did, and I'm not going to go into, look, you know, uh, this episode and my platform, I think I'll alienate people if I go into a lot of the more conspiracy theories, Freemasons, and New World Order. You'll own nothing and be happy. WEF. I'll let you guys go down that rabbit hole and make your own mind up. Okay, I don't want to pollute this intellectual thread of what I'm talking about now with things that might mean that you lose trust in what I'm saying. So I'm not going to go down that route. Um, there's elements of that which I subscribe to, elements of that which I don't subscribe to. But essentially, there was a whole bunch of people in power, central banks, and whether they're connected to central governments or not, you be the judge of that. But they certainly made a decision back then, what is that, 50 plus years ago, that we think money or currency should be decoupled from gold, and that is a better idea for our increasingly more consumerist society. Now, there's theses, multiple theses. There's unlimited papers done on the rationale and everything like that. But that was the gist of it. They thought it made economic sense to be able to print money or make money that wasn't pegged or that wasn't dependent on something real. Something real, or in other words, gold. Gold is real. Currency or digits in a bank account, they're not real. I mean, a piece of paper that says $5 on it, or you know, I don't know what they make it out of, aluminum coin or copper coin or iron coin, is valued at nothing. It's what the central bank ascribes to it that gives it any real value or currency. So this is a relatively new concept. Like if you go back in human history, hundreds of years, thousands of years, it was always, originally, of course, it was largely bartering system, but then it was based on something real. Like they would actually trade gold or trade uh, precious metals or gems, semi-precious. And then it was said, okay, well, we don't want to do that. We're going to base everything on real something real. But then in the 70s, they decoupled it. Why am I saying all this? Might be boring you, but I think this is really interesting. I don't think anyone really, in the property space at least, talks about this at length. This is really important because what that meant is that now money supply, the amount of, you could say, dollars and cents, whether virtual or real, regardless of whether they're actually worth anything or not, continued to spike. It actually had a huge jump. Okay, and that's why we had big inflation crises. You think the inflation crisis of the last 2 years is big? It's nothing compared to that of the 80s, etc. And that's why interest rates in Australia reached almost 19% in the 80s. But that's for another day. So this is what's happening. It's caused unlimited money almost almost in the world. I mean, what is the debt of the USA? I mean, it's, dozens of trillions of dollars. It actually rises by $1 trillion. Might get this wrong every week or every month, something like that. It's you can't even fathom it. So what this means is that, well, two things. One, it means that those of you or me or whoever that are working for a wage, let's say $5 an hour if you're in, not such an advanced country, or 20 bucks an hour, let's say in Australia, whatever it is, your wage has been growing, let's say at CPI, okay, over the last 30 years, 20, 30 years. But real inflation is actually different to what the ABS reports it as, all right? And this is the thing, they've changed their definition of inflation multiple times in the relatively short tenure of the Australian Bureau of Statistics. And so, therefore, the reality, if they kept their original definition, the inflation on average over the last 20, 30 years in Australia has been way over, 3 or 4%. It's actually been more than 5 or 6%. That's one point. The second point I want to make, and I hope you're still with me because I think this is really going to Hopefully these points germinate in your consciousness and give you more conviction in your wealth creation goals and how to achieve your money happiness pursuits. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is, not only has inflation been so high, therefore meaning that your real wage growth has taken you further and further back. That's inflation, but then currency debasement. Every now and then we have an economic crisis or crises. People like to use the word recession flippantly, and as not a clickbait, but like a sensationalist, hyperbolic kind of attention grabber. Not all of the recessions are all that bad or even steep. There are some that are steep, and just like the GFC. And when those occur or happen, then there's a whole bunch of monetary or money supply that gets injected, M2, we say technically in economics parlance, into the world economy, local economy, national economies. And so if you just understand one point, if there's one point I want you to understand, is that the amount of money that exists in the world today, okay, today, is like 1,000x of what existed just 20 years ago. And what existed 20 years ago, like at the turn of the century, let's say, is like 10 or 15x how much existed when these major, mostly Western democratic sort of current countries decided to decouple their exchange or their currency from the gold standard. And so the amount of money supply being pushed into the economies, basically money printing, okay, to alleviate these economic crises and smooth them over like we're right now talking. We kind of have a sense that a lot of countries around the world will avoid major recessions, US, Australia potentially, despite all this inflation. It's because they're able to better smooth out things. They're able to use monetary policy in a way that, before the global financial crisis, they thought, okay, if we go into a huge recession, it's going to take a decade to get out of it. But then they're in the GFC, they thought, well, hang on, let's just inject trillions of dollars in, give people money, they'll start spending again. Bob's your uncle. And it worked, like it really did, right? The GFC didn't last for multiple, I mean, maybe 2 or 3 years. And that's the same thing they did in COVID. If they didn't inject so much money into the economy, basically just printing it, right? Then the COVID recession wouldn't have lasted 2 months or 4 months. It would have lasted probably 5 years. I mean, the unemployment rate went up beyond 10% in under 6 months since the lockdown started. Anyway, I digress. That's tangential. But what I'm suggesting is that going in the recent history and going forward, there's be exponential growth rate in the amount of money in the economy. And what that means is, not only is inflation higher than what you reported it to be, and therefore your wages, your real purchasing power is going backwards, but this currency debasement phenomenon is meaning that your purchasing power or the value of real assets goes up higher and higher, even beyond the rate of inflation. Okay, there's some studies that have been done by World Bank, etc. And that's the funny thing about it. Much or many of these large global institutions like IMF, World Bank, they don't like hide any of this stuff. It's like not a conspiracy. They actually present these statistics quite openly. So they say that unless you make 7.5%, okay, 7.5% return on investment on your money every single year, you're actually just treading water. And you might say, hey, PK, but inflation is less than 7.5% most times. Well, actually, it's not. It's actually higher than what they report, but it's still that, okay, even if that's less than 7.5%, the currency debasement phenomenon means that what you're earning on your money is just taking you further and further back. All right. There's no scarcity of money in the world right now. There's more than enough for everyone. The scarcity, when I went to university, studied econometrics, first thing they teach you is that the whole basis of economics is based on supply, demand, and scarce resources. There is no such thing as scarce resources, guys. There's unlimited money in the world, and the multiplier effect, like when they print money, let's say they give it as a handout to a business who invests it as capex to expand their business. Therefore, they produce more goods and services. All right, they've used a loan from the bank to do that, and then they sell those goods and services. Consumers buy those goods and services. much of the time on debt. Then the business gets paid, they make a profit, so they make more than what they initially used to sell those goods and services, and they reinvest those profits. So every time the reserve banks or the central banks print a dollar, they're actually injecting more than a dollar into the economy. Over a 10, 20-year period, that dollar actually makes itself into $50, $60, notwithstanding that in that 10 or 20 years' time, the exponential rate of injecting dollars goes up and up. You see how it's just, I mean, some people say, is this sustainable? Is this not? What do you think? Let me know. If you're listening to this on the podcast, join the Facebook group. Let me know. I've not finished yet, by the way. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, put it in the comments. Do you think this is all sustainable? But let me just wrap it all up in a neat knot, in a neat ribbon, and give you the package that you really need to know. If you are not keeping up with that 7.5%, you are going backwards. That's one thing. Wages have never kept pace with real estate or hard assets, any hard asset, because of this phenomenon as well. All right. And the best way to keep up with the 7.5% principle, keep up with inflation, keep up with currency debasement is to invest in an asset that is fundamentally holding value. Okay, if you invest in things that are tied to the currency, you could go up and down. Commodities can go up and down, but something that is like land. I'm not talking houses. Okay, I'll get to that in a second as well. It's a nuanced point why we don't just buy land, but it's effectively land that is scarce, just like gold. So if you're able to tap in, if you're able to invest, or if you're able to clinch onto something that they can't make unlimited of, right? Then that thing has to go up in value because on one side of the scale, the amount of money in the world and the entire economy globally is going up at an exponential rate. Just you can go onto the Fed Reserve's website and see, I think they report daily of how many more trillions of dollars they're racking up in debt. So on one side, you're getting the scale, so much more money in the world. On the other side, you've got scarce land. And for those smart people who don't want to be in a Zimbabwe situation, Zimbabwe is obviously a hyperbolic example. They had rapid hyperinflation in a short period of time. $1 was meaningless, $100 was meaningless, $1 million was almost meaningless at some point as well in their local currency, whatever that was. This phenomenon is going on everywhere, including in Australia, but just at a more snail's pace, at a not snail's pace. I would say snail is too extreme. I would say like a tortoise. Okay, a tortoise is faster than a snail, but not as fast as a hare. Zimbabwe is a hare. So this hyperinflation is it's actually going on, but at a slower pace. So that may be a little bit controversial, so that you don't realize it's occurring, but it's occurring over your lifetime. What you own is becoming worth less, more and more so. But if you take a bit of that and invest it or hold something that is valuable, something that is actually increasing in value because it's scarce like land, that is the best way to hedge. So for those of you who are saying like, okay, well, this is great, but how's the average person meant to afford all of this? How's the average person going to buy a house in Brisbane? How my grandkids going to buy it in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, even Perth or Adelaide these days? Like at some point there's a cap. At some point, you know, y- people can't afford this land, these properties. Okay, the property, the structure on top is just there so that we can get rent from the tenant to be able to hold it so it doesn't cost us anything, right? But really it's the land that's valuable. Okay, the structure deteriorates, it depreciates, it needs maintenance, it is worthless after 50 years, 100 years if you don't do anything to it. But the land, regardless if there's weeds or whatever growing on it, that just goes up because that is what's scarce. So you might be asking, well, at some point it's going to be completely unaffordable, right? But here's the thing, and it's a harsh reality, and I'm not saying that I like it. I'm just reporting on truth right here because this channel, this platform's all about truth. The reality is that there are always enough, and in fact, through this multiplier money injection, money supply multiplier effect, there's more and more and more and more rich, super rich people in the world. You just have to look around. You just have to like go on a drive on the Gold Coast or Sydney or some other place. just to see that even in times like this, like went to the Australian Open this year, we're in the right smack bang in the middle of like this Victorian state economy going bust. Everyone's can't afford anything. Media headlines, people can't afford, you know, their mortgage repayments, living in tents, all that terrible stuff, yet record attendance for Australian Open tennis, right? And it was the biggest attendance, and the tickets were the most expensive they ever were, right? So, what it's just a one example, right? You can't make a whole thesis or premise based on one example, but there's data to back this up, and I will do a separate episode to edify and validate everything that I'm saying today. What I'm saying is there's enough rich people, and those rich people are rising in number, and their assets or their net worth and also cash flow is rising at an exponential rate that it doesn't matter if the middle class, if the middle people, if the average, the median person in Australia can afford in a capital city or even a large regional town like Newcastle. I mean, Newcastle is so expensive, Geelong is so expensive, Gold Coast is so expensive, Sunny Coast. I mean, all these places used to be cheap. Now they're not. It's because of these phenomenon that I'm teaching you right now. There's enough of people on the right side of the spectrum that it doesn't matter what affordability is. It doesn't matter. Now, you can disagree with me. Let me know if you do. But this is the observable reality. And Australia, we're kind of like a immature nation. I'm not saying that in a derogatory term at all. I mean, I love Australia. I'm so grateful, for Australia. But we're immature in the life cycle of our economy, of business, of real estate. If you go to other places around the world, like Silicon Valley, like Singapore, Hong Kong, despite everything that's happened with China recently, Monaco, other places around the world, different countries, in not just in first world countries, second world countries too, you find that house prices don't fall because the average person can't afford them, right? There's always enough rich people, there's always enough wealthy people that basically dictate the orientation and destiny of real estate prices. Now, I'm not saying real estate prices don't come down. Don't take that message away. Even in Australia, long term, of course, they go up, but there's always cycles, markets within markets, etc., etc. Watch so many hundreds of my other videos to get a full context and picture of what I'm trying to illustrate here. But the fortunes of the real estate market in the 2020s and more so in the 2030s, 40s, 50s are dictated by the fortunes of the rich. The poor, okay, I don't like to use that word, but just to use it anyway, those on the left hand side of the socioeconomic spectrum, they're not market makers. They're price takers. They're not price makers. They don't dictate what's happening in terms of real estate prices. The middle class used to, and probably these are the last few years in Australia where they'll continue to do so. Increasingly so, increasingly so. If you look at a distribution curve. For most things in life, there's a distribution curve where most people are in the middle, some on the left, some on the right. Therefore, it's like this, a bell curve. Increasingly so, the wealth of the world, the democratic Western economies, and it was always the case in developing nations because of corruption or whatever. But even in places like the UK, Canada, USA, New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, etc., it's skewed to the right, where there's a lot of people on the right, okay? A lot of people on the left. There's a lot of people on the right, there's a lot of people on the left, and not so many people in the middle. The middle class is evaporating. The middle class is getting eliminated by this two-pronged phenomenon: inflation, which is higher than what's being reported, and currency debasement. So they're either hustling and getting on the real estate bandwagon or other hard assets, and just like when you're clinging off a cliff, maybe with one or two fingers, they're like just trying to make it on the right hand side of the equation towards the wealthy side of the spectrum, or they don't have the foresight, wherewithal, resources, and they're falling into the left side. That's a reality that's happening globally, that's happening locally, and I mean, I don't know where I started this episode, but that's why wage growth has no correlation these days to house price growth. That's why house prices, actually, if you think about it, just to draw the full loop from where I started, That's why house prices never actually rose. Because if you normalize inflation, if you normalize currency debasement, even in the last 20 years, like Melbourne has only gone up like 3 times, or two times, I should say. It's only doubled, but you'll look at the official stats from CoreLogic, you'll be like, no, hang on, PK, since 2020, Melbourne's gone up like 4x. Yeah, but that's in nominal terms. In real terms, stripping out debasement and inflation, it's only just doubled. And that's the same as in the last 50 years. Going forward, this exponential rate will get worse and worse, depending on which side of the spectrum you're on, or better and better. I think it's going to cause a huge social calamity at some point. I'm not a sociologist or an anthropologist, or I think that's the right term, study of humans. I'm not a political scientist either. There are other nations where there comes a point at which, it's too much from a social perspective, and there's pushback, but we've never really seen that in at least the last 50 years, in advanced democratic nations. Democratic for what that word means these days, which is not as much as it used to, perhaps, when, the Berlin Wall fell. Anyway, it was a bit of a rant today, I understand. I hope that you can take bits and bobs and do your own further research to either disagree or agree or further expand upon your knowledge. But this is the sort of content that I want to aim towards now. I really don't care about making money anymore, as self-righteous and holier than thou that may sound. I really want to speak more and more about truth, whether that is self-defacing or self-edifying, or whether that helps my back pocket or doesn't help my back pocket. I think this is now more about truth because no one is doing that in Australia. If you want me to do more and more of that, and if you give me permission, because a lot of you might be like, oh, this guy's gone, he's gone wild, he's gone NATO, he's gone, into that kind of, tinfoil land. um, if you want to give me permission to talk more about this, leave the word truth in the comments below. Or if you're listening on iTunes, Google, or Spotify, and you can't leave a comment, join my Facebook group and let me know what you want me to talk about, because there's unlimited content of this side of the world that I've been dwelling in for a long time, that the mainstream media doesn't talk about. The mainstream property pundits, whether they're course sellers, buyers agents, mortgage brokers, who have you, they don't talk about. Many of them know what's up, but they don't have the permission, the social capital to talk about it, and ultimately sometimes it can hurt their businesses. I'm not really in a stage where I care about that anymore. So I want to talk more and more about that. Thank you for being with me. My name is PK, and once again, let me know, leave the word truth if you want more and more of this stuff. Thank you for being with me, and I'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.